You're listening to Zodiac Speaking, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Scene of the Crime, and Campus Killings. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
This is the Zodiac Speaking.
Hey Ross, thanks for coming on Zodiac Speaking. This is the first time having you on, and I've been looking forward to talking to you.
Hey, thank you very much, Morford. Really appreciate it.
You're one of my favorite people to listen to talk about this case because you're not always trying to force something down somebody's throat or trying to buy in on one theory or another. You're pretty open-minded, it seems, and pretty neutral. I like that. So look forward to talking with you. And if you can, just for listeners that aren't familiar with you, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, what you talk about, and where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the main place would be my channel, Planet X Filmworks. That can be found at youtube.com/Planet X Film. That's where I do my main series, deep dives, and on-location shooting of the non-canonicals, but Morph and I can get into where that's going to go. I'm also on X, I'm on Facebook, but yeah, the most places, mostly just my YouTube, and then I do have a Patreon as well where I do deep dives of some of the possibly Zodiac-related movies.
Awesome. So, along those lines, one case that's always gotten a lot of traction as a possible Zodiac case is the 1963 Domingos Edwards murders in Southern California in Santa Barbara. You've got the elements, the parallels to Lake Berryessa, and I think there's some differences too, but we can sort of talk about some of that stuff. But
Sure.
You've spent time there, you've gone there, you've spent a lot of time digging into that case. Just give listeners, if you want, a brief overview in your estimation of the case there, of what happened and how it went down.
Yeah, absolutely. So it starts out, the events are on the June 4th, 1963. As Morph said, it's two high school sweethearts, Robert Domingos and Linda Faye Edwards. There's a lot of kind of like interesting kind of catalyst things leading up to it. And Morph and I can get into that as we deep dive it. But essentially, they go down there on what is supposed to be senior skip day. Have a chance to go to a different beach with Linda's best friend, and they can't do it due to work priorities. So they end up going alone. That's what's so interesting about this story is there's kind of all these little things that could have completely changed the timeline forever. But ultimately, they end up going down there by themselves. Landscape has changed a little bit. So Bobby parks on what's kind of like a median parking lot of the highway there. They go down there. They obviously there's what's called the George Gill Shack, is this kind of lean-to transient shack that is down there on the creek. And they encounter this assailant. They're both shot about 20 times, 11 and 9, seemingly escaping. So they're just down there sunbathing, and they seemingly get attacked for no reason. Obviously, some possible Zodiac parallels there. As Morph said, their bodies are dragged into the shack and kind of piled on top of each other. The shack is possibly attempted to set on fire, although there's no real, timeline on that, as Rich's articles say. And then it's just from there on out, it's kind of the investigation afterwards, which is Bobby's father. I mean, most of us in California, and I think most of us in the States, we're all kind of familiar with this. George Hutch, Bobby's father, reaches out to police almost right away, but they give him the old, hey, it hasn't been 24 hours yet runaround, which is like the worst thing any of us hear in this type of situation. He goes down there with Bobby's friend, and they encounter highway patrolman Schultz, who they kind of flag him down. I think he had someone pulled over, if I remember correctly. They kind of flag him down. He goes down there, investigates the shack. He tells them basically, yeah, you don't want to go in there. And then on out, it's felt like Morph is obviously familiar with this, a months long investigation looking into the ammunition that's found there, which is Western Super X 22 LR, which we know, very familiar in the Zodiac community. That's obviously what Zodiac uses as a call sign in some of his later letters, referring to Lake Herman Road. So that's kind of one of the stronger connections, I guess. And yeah, it's just a very difficult investigation. From there, Morph and I can break it down point by point, but they exhaustively look into the ammo, where it's available, and how it could have been purchased and things of that nature. And it just kind of seems everything becomes a dead end at that point. We can get into the Reed and Coleman crime spree, culminating with the Vern Charles Smith murder, which occurs the day before, and then the infamous Sandy. It's kind of this essentially a ghost in the true crime world. This character that everybody sees, but no one's ever really able to nail him down. This particular case, it just spirals into all these kind of random rabbit holes, which come out as dead ends, which, in my opinion, I'd say probably the most frustrating of the canonicals. I don't know if the non-canonicals. I don't know if you'd agree, Morph.
Yeah, it's, whether it's Zodiac or not, it's an interesting case just on its own, with all the different pieces of the puzzle that are attached to it. The mystery Sandy. There were some sniper activity in the area leading up to this. Just other little nuggets that you think, okay, maybe they're connected, maybe they're not. But there's just, the shack, all these little tidbits that you wonder, okay, what's important here? What's not? What could be Zodiac related? What doesn't match some of the Zodiac things? I think for for most Zodiac listeners of this show are pretty familiar with this case, but just for somebody that's listening that's not, the most common belief amongst law enforcement here is that they were when they were assaulted. Linda was forced at gunpoint to tie Bobby up using pre-cut lengths of bindings. And that is precisely what Zodiac did at Lake Berryessa. So for any new listeners who aren't familiar with this case, that's the main thing that, obviously you have lone teenagers on a beach, nobody else around, that kind of matches. But it's that specific MO that really, makes this case a possible Zodiac case. And I think the one thing that people look at now, I had heard something 2 years ago from a source that at this point, I don't even remember who it was, but I can't say they were reliable. But I was told that there was a wing walker boot print found at the scene, which is another reason Santa Barbara is so confident that was Zodiac. And of course, there was a wing walker boot track found at Lake Berryessa. And again, that's not verified. I don't know at this point. I can't remember who told me that, but I can't even say it was accurate. It could have been something somebody heard secondhand. But obviously, if that was true, that would make a really interesting thing. Had you heard anything about those kinds of things?
Only the same rumor that you heard. I've tried to push JB Averett a little bit. He is, a PhD sergeant, and he has kind of read the files from what I've heard, and I'm sure you've seen him post on the forum, or that he has tried to push to get at least something released, and basically nothing has been released. So what I do know is they do know the boot size. I would still find that pretty interesting if it was 10 and a half, even if it wasn't wing walkers, as Morph said. If it was wing walkers, I think that'd be quite a bit stronger. I think that would probably be enough for me to say, it's close to a slam dunk. But again, this one's really all over the place. I'm not sure if Morph knows, but I did try to FOIA it. I just got the usual response. I'm sure Morph's gotten it with a million cases, which is it's an open case. It can't be FOIA'd. So
yeah, in California,
there, unfortunately.
California's a tough state for getting a lot of FOIA requests too. I've run into several roadblocks. But yeah, obviously I understand it's an open investigation. You don't want to spoil the opportunity to solve it. But here we are, I'm terrible at math, 62 years later. So that perpetrator, even if they were on the young side, even if they were 17 or 18 years old, they're what, 80 years old. So the chances are likely that the person that did this are not alive, or they're really up there in age. My thinking with law enforcement on a case that old is, what do you have to lose by releasing something now that you've been holding back, for all these years? Because you've been holding it back, and what has that got you? It's gotten you an ice cold case with nothing being solved. So I'm of the belief that whatever they have in this case, it's time to really share it and release it. And to your point too about John Averitt, he's probably one of the people that supplied the most information on this crime and this crime scene. He's got a good series of videos out there on YouTube that people should check out to really get an idea of the lay of the land. And I know you went there in person too, and you went down and checked that area out. Tell us about going there and what it was like navigating the area. And I know it's changed a little bit, but what was the area like? And if you're somebody sneaking up on somebody down there, what does it look like? What are you seeing?
I mean, it's basically a golden gift if you're trying to ambush some, random couple that's just, sunbathing or whatever, maybe has their backs to the inland and, isn't seeing you coming. Of course, Morph knows there's the cow tunnel down there because the creek does go up, through under the mountain there. I believe that's changed. I couldn't give you the exact dates of when that was constructed, but and then obviously there was the shack down there. This is definitely the most expansive location I've been to. Obviously Ray Davis is just simply a back alley. Ocean Beach is just basically one street that butts up against the bluff there. That would be the Swindles. And then obviously you guys are all familiar with RCC and the Riverside campus, but this is by far the most expansive. It's actually a hilarious story, Morpho. We all kind of got lost when we were hacking through the bush down there to the trails. So they're pretty long trails. I mean, it's definitely an effort to get down there. It's not just a quick, probably 2 or 3 minute stroll, which is what most people think looking back, looking at the maps. It's actually quite a stroll down there. And yeah, we were lost for, I think, nearly 45 minutes hacking through the bush with machetes until we actually find the real trail to get down there. Once you get down there, it's very rocky on that beach, and I couldn't tell you how much has changed. All I've seen are like kind of the same basic crime scene photos that we've all seen. I think, there's like maybe 2 or 3 of them of the beach from back then, Morph. But yeah, it's extremely rocky beach. The creek was pretty high when we were there. As my understanding, it kind of ebbs and flows with, the California drought. But and then that wooden platform that you guys can all see in the History Channel series, which was like, I think, further out on the beach, that actually got washed into the creek. So it was kind of floating in the water. So that's kind of where we did that scene in my episode, was us kind of standing on it. What I really wanted to do, Morph, was kind of walk you guys up the creek and just kind of like get up to the site of the shack. And then I know people years ago have gone up there and kind of like found debris from the shack. So that was my goal. It was kind of, to get up there and get a piece of the shack. We didn't really get that far in. Once we started shooting, we've got to do our thing with the drones and the cameras and stuff. So it's just a lot of effort. But yeah, that was my goal. Was I really want to get in there. The shack, as Morph and I were coming to, it was burned down and destroyed after the crime. So that is no longer there.
Now it's an interesting scene because, I'm from New Jersey. We have some nice beaches in New Jersey, and I'm in Florida. We have some nice beaches here. The beaches I'm used to are nice, clean, sandy beaches that are wide open that you could walk on, not hurt your feet. Everything I've ever seen of this beach, it looks kind of rocky, as you mentioned. Not to me, someplace that'd be the ideal swimming spot, but obviously, in that area, if they want to go swimming bad enough, that's where they went. And it sounds like it was a popular place. And if I'm not mistaken, they had met there with friends before in that same exact spot. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that's the case. It was familiar. I mean, it wasn't just familiar to them either. Like, I think it was like kind of familiar to that whole senior class. Like, people had gone down there all the time. And as Morph said before, there was the surfers down there who, basically got shot at by the random sniper. And then I believe there was like basically 2 cases of that. So, and we'll come to that. that's kind of another reason why I don't think Sandy has anything to do. I mean, we haven't even covered Smith yet, but we'll get to it. Why Sandy has anything to do with Domingos Edwards, because it sounds much more like a person that was kind of like staked out down there already, that was kind of like plotting. I mean, Richard does a really good job. I mean, he's got 3 or 4 articles on this, but one of them he discusses like, the hunter type character, maybe shooting small game. I mean, because there's all these ammo boxes kind of left in the shack. So like that says to me it was like somebody waiting in ambush. I mean, that's quite a bit different than the Zodiac crimes, because he obviously just drives up in a car real quick, does the job, and drives away. But again, we don't know how much, his MO could have changed from 63 to 68 to 69. So, yeah, there's just the ankle busters down there. It is really rocky. I like Morph was saying, I assume it was smoother back then. Otherwise, why would people go down there all the time when Gaviota State Beach is like, just a few miles due north? It's like a whole, beautiful state park. So, and it's actually called Canada del Molino. I'm sure at one point, Morph and I will discuss the recent Netflix documentary and what they did there when they actually didn't even name the right beach, but we can save that for later, Morph. It's not important.
Yeah, and I think maybe as you mentioned, there was better swimming areas not far away, but maybe this is someplace that gave them some privacy, which they wanted. And I'm assuming too that you mentioned having to cut your way down there with machetes, but back then I'm assuming that it was much clearer, easier to get down to that without having to, go through the brush.
Yeah, I would assume so. I know there was like some flooding later on that kind of further washed it out. So it's kind of just, a lot of natural activity going on there. Even coming back up the hill on the trails, the way they have it right now is like there's some pretty steep parts where there's ropes where you actually have to pull yourself up the rope. So it's not, my point is like it's not easy terrain, guys. Like in these 4 non-canonicals I've covered, I'd say this is probably without a doubt the most difficult terrain. And you could get a pretty good idea on my episode where we shot the cliffs with the drones and stuff. And but I mean, once you get down there, like Morph said, it couldn't be more secluded. Very of course the whole creek there, and then just like and then obviously what's above, you got the ocean out there, like Morph was saying, and then above that you got the highway. So I'm really not sure anyone would really hear much, even, the 20-ish gunshots, you know what I mean? Whereas it's getting close to night, and maybe if that's, almost around rush hour, I couldn't obviously tell you how traffic was back then, but I assume not much would be heard at all.
Yeah, and you've got the trains coming through there too.
Yep.
I don't know how frequently they ran, but you've got that cliff area with the wide open ocean right there, the highway, as you mentioned, the train. I mean, that's all a lot of camouflage for gunshots.
Absolutely.
And I sort of want to go back for a second, and it's been a while since I read about these, but if you've got this beach or surrounding beaches right in this area in the days and weeks leading up to it that had multiple sniper incidents where kids on the beach were shot at, this is pretty serious. That's not something you start shooting at people. That's dangerous. And, I can see that leading to, okay, let me go further. Let me just not, let me not stop here. Let me go down and try and talk to these people or get closer to them and assault them. And my gut feeling is I'm pretty sure in my mind that the person that was doing that sniper shooting is the same person that killed them. And again, it's been a while since I read about how many incidents there were. And, but to me, I can't, I find it hard to believe that there's somebody capable in that area of shooting at people and another person capable of doing this double murder in that same little vicinity. I have a hard time believing that's not the same person. What do you think?
I think you're 100% right. I think it's obviously the killer trying to psych themselves up to do the job. I think, apparently it was like 11 surfers. I think that first time, which, again, that's much more difficult a crime than a boyfriend and girlfriend kind of with their back turned that aren't really, look at you or see you coming out of the shack or the tunnel or wherever. Interesting enough, Morph, I'm sure you're familiar with the Lake Berryessa sniper article, August 11th.
Yeah.
And so, in my mind, I always wonder if, that now, again, Rich does have a few articles about these kind of random, kind of angry teen type characters that I guess were unfortunately shooting at cars on the highways and in California in the 60s, which I guess was a thing from the articles I've written. So there's really no way to know if this is just random activity. But, if myself and Morph are right about, the sniper trying to kind of psych themselves up to do this kill. And then I don't know if that is possibly another Lake Berryessa parallel.
Yeah, it's just, if you're going to start shooting at people on a beach, that tells me you're capable of doing something worse. You know what I mean? Because it's not that much of a jump to go to the next step of doing what happened to Bobby and Linda. On the heels of this, obviously, this was a big double murder, shocked that community, but it was on the heels of the other murder committed by two young boys and this mysterious Sandy. Now, as you mentioned, he's been sort of a ghost. He's sort of there's a sketch of him and that's all. Tell us a little about that how that ties into this case.
Yeah, so the sheriff started looking into that because that murder of Vern Charles Smith is the night before. But I can kind of give you the breakdown and also why I don't personally think it's related, and that's because the Sandy crime spree with Reed and Coleman starts at the Santa Cruz Boardwalk, which is nearly 4 hours north. And I'd also like to point out that where that is in Lompoc. So in my episode, when I do the Vern Charles Smith story, you can kind of see me standing in that canyon. I think it was at San Miguelito Canyon Road, I believe. And I don't know if I butchered that pronunciation, Morph. It's really a narrow road that is stuck between these two mountain passes. There's a small park there, but it's all kind of wedged and really tight. So that was actually kind of where I was standing when I was telling that story, is kind of the exact location of Vern Smith's trailer. I didn't actually say that in the episode, but it's like a very claustrophobic location. I think it's 30, 40 miles north of that beach. Obviously, we traveled by car. So when people kind of, what people kind of come to is okay, Vern Smith got stabbed the night before and Sandy supposedly had a .22 rifle. So Sandy's the killer of Bobby and Linda. I think that's kind of a reach. You know what I mean? And again, anything's possible, but I just don't really think that the evidence points that way. And one thing I need to clean up quickly, Morph, is on my episode, I took a giant megaphone and screamed to everybody that Sandy got cleared, but Morph did a much better job on that on the criminology podcast. So there was a suspect of Sandy who seminally matched the description, and that is actually who was cleared by the Santa Ana detective. So I kind of doubled down on that pretty strongly, Morph, and it wasn't actually Sandy himself, but I mean, that's a whole nother problem, is there's several people matching this Sandy description. Basically a sandy blonde haired kid that's around 16, 17, around 140, 150 pounds. And the amount of kind of coastal surfer kids that looked like that in the greater area is a massive amount. So that's kind of another problem with Sandy. But basically these guys link up randomly. They steal some sandwiches from YMCA, and their crime spree kind of escalates. They break into a woman's house and steal some money from her. They steal this Sunbeam convertible, and that kind of takes them down to the Lompoc area where one of their mothers works at a diner. So when they're eating there and she pays for their meal, that's when they encounter Vern Charles Smith. I don't know if it's her or one of the patrons there that tells them hey, this guy is a minor. I don't know if Morph found more on Vern, but there's really not much other than him. Then he's this kind of minor dude. And what they tell him is, or what they're told is, he carries a bunch of cash on him. So they pretty much come up with the conspiracy to murder him. Well, actually not murder him, but basically just rob him. And they say that their car is out of gas. They go to his trailer late at night, and he fills up I don't know if it's Sandy he goes to with the gas station. He fills up a can of gas for them, comes back, and he's about to fill it up. And then, again, I want to caution that this is according to Reed and Coleman. While Vern is filling up the gas tank, Sandy supposedly pulls out the pocket knife, stabs him in the back, which penetrates his heart, basically instantly kills him. It's just unfortunate that the only, version of it we have are the two guys with the supposed guy we can't find committing the crime spree. So I don't know how, legit that their opinion is. Obviously, if two 16 and 17-year-old kids get, incarcerated. What are they going to say, Morph? Well, it wasn't us. It was the third guy with us that we can't find now. You know, it just
the mystery Sandy, yeah.
Yeah, it just seems
and
convenient.
it's and you would think, okay, maybe if they made that mistake, because teenagers do some dumb shit and commit some bad crimes sometimes, but you would think now as adults that have had time to reflect, and I don't know if they're still alive, but during their time as adults, you think they might have owned up to it and said, okay, it was us, we did it, we made a mistake, there was no Sandy, but that never happened.
Right.
So was there a Sandy? Maybe there was, but he's been sort of a figment of sort of a ghost. And there was a name that they thought was possibly him, and I forget. I think it had something to do with shredded clothes or something.
Yeah. So there's we know Sandy was real. And mind you, they recovered the knife and I think the wallet and a bunch of things they threw out the window. They were able to recover that stuff. I believe they also had the sunbeam morph, so it was also like beyond me that they can't just print the car, and it'd be hard to believe that Sandy sat in the back seat and literally didn't touch anything. But he had these army fatigues that he was said to have stolen from an Army Navy store. And then I think it had, let me see if I have it in my notes here. So he used two names, Robert Kaufman and William Carr. One of those he used at the Arroyo Grande Hotel when he was dropped off there. And the lady there did say, someone of that description matched. And then they also went on this kind of weird adventure with some random girls to, I think, a dump. And Sandy was supposed to be hiding in the back of the girl's car and I think left the jacket there. So I think that's what Morph is referring to. And I'm not sure which name, but again, the name written with Sharpie in the jacket literally could have been on it when he bought it. So I don't know how much that does for him.
That's true. And I think the name I know he used a couple different names. I think the name that was on the jacket was Robert Kaufman, if I remember correctly. But, just freezing here for a second, whether this case is related to Zodiac or related to Domingos Edwards, it might not be related at all. But you mentioned there's some things with evidence. The knife was recovered. That's huge. Why not check that for DNA? Why not check that for, maybe cut himself, maybe his just touching it, he left DNA in the blade area, in the handle area. That seems like something they should be doing or should have tried anyway. I don't know if they have, but it seems like a no-brainer to try and see if there's DNA on there that could be from the killer.
I mean, prints. I mean, if he's the stabber, according to Reed and Coleman, I mean, obviously, maybe they handled it after, and whoever law enforcement. Obviously, we're talking about a time essentially of, pretty much, prehistoric forensics. You know what I mean by our modern standard. But I'd expect there to be something. I mean, so the articles doubled down on that hard because they call him like the laughing boy, laughing killer. Because when he was like stabbing Vern in the back, he was laughing while doing it. And honestly, like, the whole thing doesn't really sound believable to me. And then apparently Reed and Coleman asked him why he did it after, and he said he didn't know. It's just like there's not any reasoning for anything that you hear about this story. You know what I mean? Like,
and collecting the evidence you mentioned back then, 1963, they didn't know about DNA. Obviously, they knew about prints and stuff. But I'm assuming that knife went straight into an evidence bag and stayed in there. We hear about evidence that's not stored properly, not handled well, but even after that long, if that went into an evidence storage bag, they could be worth testing with today's technology and see what's on there if they can do that.
100%. Yeah. I mean, and again, where did the sunbeam go? Like, I never heard anything about it after this case. Like, they must have impounded it at some point, or maybe they located the owner and returned it, and there's just kind of no way.
Yeah, that's probably a lost cause, but I guarantee that knife has to be in evidence, so why not test it? And then it moves me back to Domingos Edwards. So what things do we know are in evidence that the killer handled there? Because there's bound to be a chance of DNA on those too.
Yeah, I mean, we can unpack that a little bit more. So obviously there's the ammo boxes down there, the spent cartridges and the ammo. I mean, I assume they, picked up whatever spent casings they found. I did have my little pocket metal detector down there. I would have liked to have found, a casing or something, although, probably with all the flooding, that's probably a tall order, right, Morph? But, there was the Marlin Hitch rope that, Rich chronicles on his articles. And so, I mean, one thing that we should get into is the story of the bruises on Robert's fists and his face. Now, there's kind of, I know Morph's done this case a couple of times on past pods, differing versions of this. He apparently broke up a fight at school. I don't know how violent of a fight that was. Was Robert actually punching those guys to get them to stop fighting? Because that doesn't seem like how you break up a fight, right? So it seems like a lot more likely that it was Robert versus the assailant, which is kind of what I think based on, Linda running and then just kind of, the basically this would be, if this is the Zodiac, this would by far be the messiest scene, right? Because something goes wrong, and then ultimately they find 75 feet up the bluffs, they find these blood splatters on the rocks, which are said to be like from the assailant if he got punched in his face by Bobby. So I wonder if they were able to collect any of those rocks, and then which case you would have. And again, I guess it's a question for Susanna Morph, because I'm not going to pretend to be the forensics guy. I know literally nothing about it. But if it was collected and they have it in evidence, would they still be able to test that? Because obviously a blood sample is not anything we have from the canonicals. So,
yeah. And back then, obviously, I think they could tell what blood type somebody was at best. They could tell if they were like a secretor or non-secretor, things like that. But obviously they had no idea about DNA, so they wouldn't have collected that blood saying, let's get some DNA, because they didn't know anything about that. But it would be interesting to know if anything with blood other than, Bobby's or Linda's is in evidence, because there's a very good chance that could belong to their killer. But even beyond that, you've got the bindings, you've got the shell casings, you've got the ammo boxes, like you mentioned. Plus, who knows what was held back? Maybe there's other things that were held back that they have. Just seems like, I don't know. I just feel like this case just should be given a shot to be tested with all the new technology and DNA and what they have to work with now. Even a single hair, a rootless hair now can yield a DNA profile. So it just seems like this is a case that they should try and clear using the latest technology. Maybe they have been working on it, but it seems like it's a frozen case sitting up on a shelf that's not going anywhere, unfortunately.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Of course, there was the towel supposedly found over Linda's face. So did the assailant handle that with, without gloves? It's kind of the same question we're always asking about. Barry S. There was some sort of tarp or towel around the shack. So if he was trying to light it on fire, did he touch the shack? I mean, obviously they did light it on fire and destroyed it after, so that might take care of that. But yeah. And again, the big story is holdbacks. Morph and I can kind of come to the press release in the early 70s of what they came out to, seemingly insinuating Arthur Lee Allen, because they thought he was down at Atascadero, which, in my point, is still, in my view, it's still really not that close to where this occurred. So, I mean, yeah, I guess if that's the best they can do. Again, there's a bunch of these local suspects, which I break down in my suspect segment at the end of my episode. Seemingly people who would fit the mold. George Gill is the one who built the shack. He essentially, I think his polygraph is inconclusive, but he's mostly cleared. And then Robert Lee Bell, there's quite a few more, kind of like local guys. And, obviously Sandy, who I don't really think fits the mold. I mean, Bobby being an all-American football player and president of the Farmers Association of America, a guy as small as Sandy, I don't think Bobby would have had much difficulty handling him, to be honest. That's my view, but, anything's possible.
Yeah, and I mean, this could be somebody that knew them, that knew they would be there that day and knew that they'd be alone, could have happened upon them. Or, where they parked, the killer could have just drove right by, saw their car and said, I know where they're at. They're down on the beach. Yep. Got out, parked next to them, and walked down to the beach and, surprise them. So that's tough with this case. You don't know if it's somebody that they knew, somebody that had a beef with them, or somebody that was just a total stranger looking to, do this to them, and going back to the sniper for a second, the sniper, assuming they didn't know who they were shooting at, they're just shooting at random people on the beach far away. So it's very possible that sniper didn't know who they were aiming at, and they were just aiming at whoever they could see out there and had a chance to shoot at. So that's, I think, part of the problem with this case that makes it so difficult, is not knowing if this was random, or, if this was something that was pre-planned, or something where they knew, the victims, and this started out as a personal type matter. Now, one thing that is interesting is that Linda's bathing suit was cut, exposing her breast. There's a, sort of a sexual element to that we don't really see with the Zodiac crimes. Zodiac never really tried to undress anybody or anything along those lines. What do you think of that clue?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. The only problem is we don't know, was it cut before or after, she expired, which, there's kind of no way to know that. I'm not sure how they verified it, even it was cut, I guess, just from the look of like a straight, kind of a straight line, because I had also thought of, did the assailant grab her top when she ran, and maybe it ripped when he pulled it? I mean, if it's 100% verified, he cut it, and it seems like by knife. In my scenario, I was kind of thinking that's what triggered Bobby. Is he went after the girl, or Bobby thought that's where he was going, so he kind of took matters into his own hands at that rate. And then again, kind of something that doesn't really, at least that we know of, fit Zodiac's MO, at least not in the canonicals, is dragging those bodies about 30 feet and kind of piling them on top of each other in the shack, and then perhaps supposedly trying to create the funeral pyre. But I mean, Gritch does make a great point. I mean, maybe in the Younger's killer mind, lighting the bodies on fire is covering evidence, but also creating that smoke is also like, pretty much putting a spotlight on, the exact location. And, again, if you can't get out of there fast, you're kind of just drawing attention to the area. So it's baffling. Not everything makes sense. And, again, definitely some Zodiac parallels, as Morph said, and then a lot of extra with Gaviota Beach.
Yeah, and that's what's so frustrating about this case. You have some good clues, some interesting evidence, but you don't know exactly how it ties together. One clue was the ammo. We talked about it being similar to ammo that Zodiac used. But, I mean, 22 long rifle ammo was pretty common, and the brand was kind of common too. But I think the biggest clue was where it was bought. Tell us a little bit about the ammo, where it was bought.
Yeah. Okay. So we don't actually know. So it's a lot number TL21, and it is sold at Vandenberg Air Force Base. What Averett covers in his 5-part series, as Morph said, is that it's theorized it could have been like a battle pack, and that's basically like a bulk order, like 1,000+ rounds. So each box is not necessarily going to be stamped with, like a price or something like that. It's probably just sealed all in one. And then there's another Santa Barbara ammo shop that also sold it. So I think that lot number kind of got sold to local kind of distributors. And again, law enforcement spent months and months investigating that, hoping that it would pan out, hoping that people could report people that had ammo of that lot number. I just don't think there was really enough there to follow up on anything. But again, what it says to me is, okay, so the sniper event is reported by James L. Summer, where they were shot at by 2 bullets from the train tracks, and then that was June 2nd. Several teens said a sniper fired shots at them while surfing. They could not see the shooter. And then, like Morph said, all the boxes kind of left in the shack. It bespeaks like to someone waiting in there, taking these pot shots at people, like Morph said, and then trying to ambush someone. And people make a big deal of Sandy supposedly attaining the 22 rifle. And it's like, I just don't see Sandy down there shooting at these random people, going up there, then stabbing Vern Smith for no reason and killing him for $360. Wouldn't he have just took the gun and then just shot Vern and just got it over with? And instead of dealing with the unnecessity of the knife, that's kind of where I'm at on it.
And the one thing that was reported was the fact that the police believed that this gun that was used was a rifle, a 22 rifle.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's mainly based on the ammo, that it was 22 long rifle ammo, but as we know, that can also be shot out of a handgun.
Yeah.
Do you know anything more about why the police believe that it was an actual rifle, not as opposed to a handgun that was used?
Only so the articles say an automatic rifle, like as anyone knows, Morph, especially when you read through these articles, there's so many misspellings and wrong names and things that are incorrect. So it's kind of like hard to just go off of an article itself. Baker believed it was a rifle. I do know that he came on as the cold case detective later after the events. And as Morph just said, 22 long could be fired from a 22 long pistol just as easily as a rifle. But based on, like I said, this being the widest, longest, most expansive landscape of any of these non-canonicals, I personally do think it was a rifle as well. And I also think that's what could have hindered the assailant when Bobby started hitting him. Because somebody walks up to you and starts throwing, fists in your face, it's pretty easy to quick draw a pistol and just put it to their chest. But if you've got the rifle between you and you're trying to line up that shot down the sight, and someone gets closer than, long range, it could definitely, make a difficulty. And then also the reloading, after he dropped the bodies, he deliberately reloaded and continued shooting them. That does insinuate some sort of anger of something going wrong after he, possibly just got knocked down with a punch or something like that. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Think a pistol would react a lot faster. You know what I mean? As I was saying.
Yeah, and there's less of a chance that the rifle's longer. Bobby could have reached out for it and grabbed onto the end of it versus he'd have to reach a lot further for a handgun.
Yeah, to the side, all that.
Yeah, and then we go back to if this is a sniper, likely was a rifle because they're probably not going to be firing pistol shots out into the surf area. So
100%.
it makes sense that it would be a rifle, and maybe over time, if this was Zodiac, maybe he learned from this. Hey, I'm never going to use a rifle again for this kind of attack.
Mm-hmm.
But then we go to Lake
100%.
Barris, and if that is a rifle, then maybe he sort of went back. But when he, assuming it is him for a second, maybe when he actually decided to attack somebody at Lake Barris, he said, "I'm not going to use the rifle. I'm going to use a handgun." It's definitely a case that the police back then, at least, I don't know what their thinking is today. It seems like they've gone pretty quiet about this case, but it seemed like back in the day, they were gung ho that this was a Zodiac crime. I'd love to talk to somebody there now and see what their thoughts are and how open they are, and find out if they've done anything, if they're willing to try anything with new technology. Have you talked to anybody there within law enforcement recently?
Yeah, when I did the FOIA, I reached out to the cold case detective, and he did just kind of give me that answer that, open case doesn't, can't be FOIA'd. And I did try to reach out to get, a few more questions answered. And then I think that detective I was talking to, I think retired this Monday. So I'm going to try to forward those to someone else. I was hoping to reach out and kind of get a statement, for my episode of the main series from SB Sheriff's Department. Again, I was never really expecting much because, again, literally since Morph said, literally since this press release, when they said was like, hey, it's a strong link to the Zodiac, and due to him being in the area, it seems like the him was certainly Arthur Lee Allen. So once he dropped off the map, and this was, I think, Sheriff Webster at the time, we essentially never get another update ever again, as Morph was saying. So, I mean, that I'd have to look, I think, with the press release, I think was that like 71 or 72 or something like that, Morph. So,
yeah,
I mean,
early 70s.
I mean, geez, I would expect literally anything. I mean, even as not a fan of all of us are of Riverside, Riverside gave me more than that on my FOIA, which was just a few pictures and like a press release. But that's more than what Santa Barbara gave me. So
let's get the elephant out of the room here and talk about Arthur Lee Allen. That recent Netflix documentary that we covered on the podcast.
Yeah.
To me, it was nothing to it, but obviously there was some trying to connect Arthur Lee Allen to this area and trying to make him look guilty by being down in this area. What are your thoughts about Arthur Lee Allen being involved at all with this?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound selfish, pretentious, but I would have loved if they would have reached out to me and gotten a statement on Gaviota Beach, because I think what they did on that documentary was totally embarrassing. They spin this yarn that Alan goes to Vandenberg Air Force Base, buys a massive chunk of ammo right in front of the Seawater kids, and then drives down there to what they call Tahigis Beach, which is a totally different beach, as you could all see from Richard Grinell's articles and maps. So I found the whole thing to be sloppy and an insane reach, as well as him going to RCC. I mean, it is semi-verified, right, that he went to the races near Riverside, but the way they did Riverside in that documentary was like, he has a basically motel room full of children with him, and wake up in the morning, we gotta run, and then the cop lights are coming in as they're driving out. Like, the Riverside thing was totally unbelievable. The Gaviota Beach story was totally unbelievable. They're essentially saying that he was at Atascadero, which, like I said, is not super close. It's still, I think, 70, 80 miles away. Whereas, as I mentioned, we have several local, suspects. George Gill, who made the shack. Robert Lee Bell, who was a classmate. Sandy is not that close, but he's at least somewhat down there. So it didn't make any sense to me that he goes down there, buys the ammo right in front of a bunch of witnesses, leaves children in his car. I want everyone to pay attention to this statement I'm making. Parks, what they called the train tracks. I'm not even sure they got that right. And then leaves them in the car, I guess locked or unlocked, playing in the car, goes down there and commits a murder. It was a bit like watching the crime on fast forward, Morph, because, my understanding is, we have a guy that's a sniper 2 days before, a shack full of ammo. They don't account any of that stuff. Like, they hardly mention the shack. I don't even think, other than him buying the ammo at Vandenberg, which isn't even confirmed, as I said, they don't really mention much about that. So, like, another thing, as Morph said earlier, Morph basically started off with Robert's car, the Chief Comanche. I think I have it written down. Comanche. I have it written down somewhere. I don't even think they mentioned Robert's car being up there. So if they said, okay, Alan would have seen the car and gone down there, okay, there would have been like establishment there for going down the bluff. But they kind of just said that he used to take them on random vacation trips for a reason. And it's like, okay, so was it a Tuesday, Morph? So he showed up on a random school day where the kids apparently didn't need to be in school, somehow knew it was a local Lompoc senior skip day, and somehow came across them without mentioning Bobby's car. I'm sure I'm not the only one that has a problem with all that, Morph. But
it was very hard to swallow for me. I just too convenient the way everything just unfolded, and he randomly went out to the beach and randomly found 2 victims to presumably kill. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about Alan, because I think it's the biggest waste of time ever, but it is worth mentioning. So as much as this case has some similarity to the Zodiac case, especially Lake Berryessa, there's another case you've spent a lot of time on that I admittedly have spent very little time on. And that's because I know people like yourself are really digging into it. And that's the murder of Ray Davis. Tell us a little bit about Ray Davis's case and how that's similar to Zodiac.
Yeah, 100%. So what I would have liked to have done in my series is done them chronologically in order, and I can count years for anybody who needs to know, but ultimately we just ended up doing what was closer to where I live in San Diego. So I started with the Swindles, which was 64. We did Oceanside in episode 2, which is Ray Davis in 62. And then obviously we did 66, which is Sherry Joe Bates. And then I did Gaviota, which was 63. So I didn't exactly do them in order as I would have liked to. If, as Morph said, if Gaviota Beach is the parallels to Lake Berryessa, then Ray Davis is absolutely the blueprint and the parallel to Paul Stein. And that's, I suppose I've kind of, somewhat become the face online of the non-canonicals, because I pushed it the hardest, and this kind of full circle theory, which I know, like I've talked to Voight, and he tends to think that the full circle theory, has something to it. So this Ray Davis crime, and again, like, we'll break down the Ray Davis and the similarities to Paul Stein, which is actually something I, had wanted to do in my episode 2. And I ended up kind of just getting stuck on Davis, and I didn't really get much into the Stein stuff, but I definitely will down the line, is the fact that I don't understand why Zodiac would just like look up random local Oceanside crimes and Santa Barbara crimes. I mean, unless he lived like very close to and just kind of read the local newspaper and heard about it, because it doesn't seem like something he would take with him to the Bay Area for no reason, in my opinion. I know there's other people that look at it and they're just like, oh yeah, he just kind of paralleled all these other random crimes and used them as a blueprint. Like that doesn't really make that much sense to me, especially with the fact with Ray Davis, you get a phone call before, a threatening phone call before, and essentially a phone call after where he threatens a bus driver. It sounds a lot like Zodiac's, school bus, threatening school children on the school bus threat. And it was taken seriously, when he much like in the Bay Area, when they put all these deputies and police on the school buses, they essentially did the same thing down around Camp Pendleton. We can mention that Pendleton is a base nearby Oceanside, much like Vandenberg is near to Gaviota. So it's people are always bringing up the Zodiac military connection and what the nearby bases could be. But there's quite a bit more to Davis. So with this seemingly political threat, where Ray's body is dumped is between the former and current mayors of Oceanside's houses, and it's just kind of a random back alley. Morph mentioned the kind of sound buffering and the train at Gaviota Beach. This is actually right near train tracks at Ray Davis. And I know, people on the forums and other people have brought up, like, is there some kind of train connection in Zodiac, at least with the non-canonicals? But I obviously interviewed Christy Hawthorne in the episode. She's a local Oceanside historian and amazing research. She kind of found this. She thought it was maybe, some kind of conspiracy of rich people killing each other and stuff, until she was kind of reminded of Paul Stein, which is, kind of the mirror image of this crime. And so she kind of pointed that out to me, like exactly what Morph was saying. If Zodiac would have waited until this train ran by in Oceanside to pull the trigger on Ray Davis, I'm not sure anyone would have heard anything, even in this kind of semi-congested beachside alleyway, with the houses so close. It's like, if you're standing right next to a train, I mean, and Morph could tell you, anyone could tell you, like, it's pretty loud. So if the gunshots are kind of secluded in this taxi, I don't know that anybody would have heard it. But yeah, there's some differences, of course. Ray's wallet and stuff, and the cash is still on him, so it's not robbery. The car does get driven a few blocks north. So I always wondered if that wasn't kind of similar to how Stein stopped at Maple and kept going to Cherry, like it was some kind of nod to this northern direction of the Davis crime. Just that could be totally wrong. That's just me speculating. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. I think it's a similar shot to the left side of Ray Davis's head. A third shot I think is possibly like a warning or a miss or whatever through the windshield. And then Ray's body is dumped. And I know you interviewed Susanna Morph, and she did say that seemingly the killer did touch Ray's belt when he was kind of lifted out of the cab and dumped in that alleyway. And I know, I guess she did the testing, or they did investigate that one. So as Morph and I were saying about Gaviota, another thing we would love to know is what came back on that belt. Did the killer use gloves? And, that's kind of another opportunity right there for some touch DNA.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing with these cases, especially ones with that case. We know that they've tried to work on it, and I want to speak for Susanna, so I'll let her clarify one time, maybe when she comes on, if she does. But there's things that can be done. There's things that are possible that some agencies don't have the budget to do. They don't have the thought to do, and that's why you turn it over to an expert, somebody like Susanna,
100%.
And you can say, hey, what are our options? What can we do? What can we find? What are our best chances to identify who did this, and let them do it? I know San Diego's got to have a good budget. It's a pretty wealthy area, so I'm thinking they have resources to be able to do some of this stuff. And it's frustrating in some of these cases, and I know they're older, but it's frustrating to not have results. And maybe they have done some work behind the scenes, they just don't want to say anything. But until you hear that they've done it for sure, and they give you some kind of answers, it's very frustrating with some of these cases.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And again, that's kind of why I decided to go this route of deep diving the canonicals. For one, when I put up the Swindles episode and kind of started my series, there's basically nothing on YouTube about these. A lot have popped up since Zodiac's gotten more traction online and people started looking at the non-canonicals more. But I mean, there was other than like Averett's 5-part series when they made that DVD way back when, there was, basically nothing about these, Davis included. But yeah, so again, it's 22 long ammo, and again, I can't help but think, I know it's the cheapest ammo and probably maybe most popular at the time, as Morph was saying, but I couldn't help but thinking Swindles, Ray Davis, Domingos Edwards are all 22 long. That Lake Herman Road couldn't be a nod to those 3 non-canonicals. I personally don't think that Faraday and Jensen are the Zodiac's first murders. And again, that could be debated, and it's tough to have evidence going either way. But I always felt like him making it, hey, writing those lists of, hey, this is how the bodies were. It was, super. The brand was Super X, but he also says, Western. And the thing about the Winchester Western was, it kind of there was kind of a buyout there. So you can kind of find boxes that say Winchester Super X, but you could also find boxes that say Western, kind of like another little rabbit hole down the ammo if anyone cares to go down that. But yeah, the taxi's found 2 miles north of the body location, so it does seem like he kind of jumped in the taxi and kind of drove it up there for whatever reason, a totally random thing that none of us can put our head into the mind of a killer and kind of figure out what was going on there. The first threatening phone call was something like, I'm going to pull something here in Oceanside that you guys will never figure out. I mean, that really bespeaks, Zodiac's Blue Rock Springs phone call that, Morph suspect is local to. And then later on, the Santa Barbara phone call after Berryessa. And then another follow-up, phone call afterwards in which he says, like, I'm going to get me a bus driver next time. And so, you think bus bomb later, things of that nature. So, I mean, I think Davis is one of the stronger ones. Of the 4, I'm definitely the lowest on Riverside, even though it has, of course, it has the letters and the confession letter and all that stuff. It's a complete mess. Morph and I can burn that bridge another time. But just on face value, like there's, as Morph was saying, the big story about Gavita is holdbacks, like Morph was saying. So do they know it's Windwalkers? Are there other evidence that he touched there? As Morph was saying, that they just, for whatever reason, haven't literally told us since 63. And then, of course, like Susanna said, if he did touch Davis's belt loops, is there touch DNA there? There was a book left in the car. It just seemed like a book Davis was reading. A lot of it was called Dance with the Dead or something like that. A lot of people make a big deal about that. I don't know. I mean, again, there's not that much on Davis, guys. There's only a few articles. I pretty much got everything out of Christie I could get out of her. But I mean, my big thing is the Stein parallels. Like that. If Davis is the first non-canonical, I always felt that Paul Stein was a nod to, hey, remember Oceanside? Another taxi driver, because Voight even said this. Zodiac knew he did what worked, right? He did Blue Rock Springs because he got away with it at Lake Herman Road. Lake Berryessa could be a redo of whatever went wrong at Gaviota Beach. And then obviously a taxi driver, well, you just give them an address and they go where you tell them. You're alone in the car with them. You bring them to an isolated alleyway, and it's pretty much like a victim. You can kind of control their movement. So there's that.
Do you know if Ray Davis's case ever was featured in any of those detective magazines back in the day?
I think I did try to look that up at one point, and I think we spoke about that. Not that I found, but again, that's just not that I found. It could be very possible.
Okay, because that was always one thing too that I always wondered. Could the Zodiac, even if he wasn't responsible for these other crimes, could he have read about them and duplicated things he had read? But getting back to Davis, the fact he wasn't robbed, to me, makes it more Zodiac-like, because Zodiac wasn't robbing people. I mean, he took Stein's keys and whatnot, but I mean, that was probably for more of a trophy.
Agreed. Yeah.
And so somebody that's willing to kill somebody but not rob them is more like a Zodiac type. So I think that does, along with the taunts of, that he was going to do something big in town, sort of is very Zodiac-like. So I think it lends, strength to the possibility that it could be Zodiac, or Zodiac, or the real Zodiac at least was familiar with this case and it inspired them. I'm curious, as far as do we know? You mentioned that he was shot in the left hand side of the head, correct?
Yep.
And was he shot while the killer was inside the cab?
I think that's what it has to be, because he's also shot in the back, which goes through his chest cavity. So I think
Okay.
that kind of shows us that, both shots came from behind. And
Okay.
then obviously that one shot through the windshields. I don't know if it makes any sense that Zodiac would be in front of the car, shoot through the windshield. Like, that's a warning, because they could drive the car at you or they could drive away.
Mhm.
So it just makes a lot more sense that he was in the back there. But yeah, I mean, like I said, the Davis is one I'm pretty high on. I mean, it seems to me that almost, if it's not Zodiac, like Morph said, then he almost would have had to have known about this. I mean, I know the big thing is people say like, well, he never claims any of the other ones. Why didn't he write them all down on the on Brian Hartnell's car door? I mean, I don't think any of that really mattered to Zodiac, to be honest. Like, he's not going to write a massive list of 10 crimes on there and give them more evidence to go off of. If he did make mistakes at any of these non-canonicals, that's another thing too. If he made mistakes or thought as Morph said, DNA wasn't really a thing at a time, but maybe he thought he left other evidence, you know what I mean? Or, made other mistakes that could have tracked back to him. I don't think he would go around broadcasting these, in my opinion. I mean, he obviously never got caught for the canonicals, so,
Yeah, why would he want to give any more information that linked him to any additional crimes that he wasn't already connected to?
100%. So that's a big one. People say like, well, he never. I mean, if it's a younger Zodiac and he's still kind of making his bones here, a lot of these mistakes, seemingly track for these early ones, and then he makes the persona. He comes back in the Bay Area and tries to do the the master crime. It would seem.
Well, I think some people in Zodiac circles want to connect every crime in California to Zodiac.
Sure.
And you seem like you've really focused in on a couple that have the most in common with Zodiac, and you're not trying to link every crime under the sun in California to him.
No, yeah, I don't. I mean, beyond these, I'm not even big on the kind of post canonicals, because I just don't know what's going on there with, Kathleen Johns and Donna Lass. There's just too many unknowns. The only thing I think could be possible is like Melina Rodriguez that Morph covered in his article, and again, I don't think that's as strong as these, but it's in 67. Some things fit about it. I know Hood Garcia got a really good comparison with Richard's article, of why, Domingos Edwards, kind of gets all this shine, because, and a lot of that is, I think, because of their press release. They come out and literally say there's a strong link to the Zodiac crimes due to, let me see if I could maybe pull up the press release in the background while me and Morph are talking, like, due to something, the wording is like undisclosed evidence, unreleased evidence, exactly what Morph was alluding to. So yeah, once law enforcement makes an announcement like that, everyone's going to gravitate to it, right? I think that's pretty natural.
Yeah, and I mean, I applaud everybody that digs into the case. Now, I, dug into these non-canonical cases for a while, and spent a lot of time and went down a lot of rabbit holes, and you finally focused on the canonical crimes and found my suspect, who I believe is Zodiac. But I don't try and stop anybody else from digging down these other avenues, because that way you have all the bases covered. If I'm wrong, somebody else might find the right guy digging down some of these other rabbit holes. You never know what you're going to find. So, I think it's good work that you're doing, and, your boots on the ground and getting involved and reaching out with FOIAs and everything else. And that's the right way to go about it. And, I appreciate you sharing the information about these cases and what you've done. And again, anyone listening that wants to check these out in depth, Ross's channel is great. It's got a lot of videos there and a lot of Zodiac discussions. What other Zodiac stuff do you discuss on the channel?
Yeah, so we do the interview series, kind of a complement to the main series. So we interview, longtime Zodiac researchers like Morph, Grinell. We've basically had everybody on there. I'd like to get Cole on there once I read his trilogy. coming up soon, I guess is a good place to announce it. So episode 5 will be Lake Herman Road. So I think kind of when my 8 episodes are done, we'll kind of have the complete, full circle investigation there. Presidio Heights will be the last one, guys. I'm not going to take it beyond that. And I don't want to do this thing forever. I mean, if the interviews and some of that other stuff continues on, that's cool. But as far as like the main series, I've always envisioned it just as, the 4 non-canonicals I did, and then just the 4 canonicals, and kind of leave it at that. And as Morph was saying, what kind of like led me down this path was, I saw this list of people discussing the non-canonicals on Tappa Talk. And that just got me thinking, because like Morph said, what do we really have from the canonicals? We have a bloody fingerprint at Stein. And then beyond that, we don't really get told much else. We got, a bunch of evidence that was mishandled and handled by 500 people at Lake Berryessa. So I don't think much will come from that. So just got me thinking like, hey, maybe, if there is blood at Gaviota Beach, or there is touch DNA at Davis, maybe one of these other ones can break it. They could somehow link those, a stronger, kind of, as Morph is saying, either forensic link or sort of undeniable link to the Bay Area activity. Maybe that's the way to go. Again, been a long time since we got an update on Davis or Gaviota, and we certainly don't want to talk about the last update of Riverside, because I still don't understand that, Morph. I don't think anyone does.
Yeah. Well, any of these cases, whether they turn out to be Zodiac or not, I'd still like to know who did it and find out more about it. But the good thing is we do see cases every week being solved that are 30, 40, 50 years old. So if there is evidence that's been stored properly and they're able to get something off it using the latest technology, then they might get answers. And I hope that they have the resources to try and not give up on that. Because I think it's easy for the police to say, let me work on the most freshest case that happened yesterday, because it's easier to solve. You've got fresh witnesses, you can find camera footage that wasn't available back in the 60s for these cases. So there's all kinds of things that would make it an easier solve than going back and digging into these old cases. But, these victims that we're talking about deserve justice too, despite their cases happening so far along back in the day. And, I'd love to know the truth to any of these cases, whether they're Zodiac or not.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So the exact wording is several significant similarities between our case and the others, as well as other evidence, which I am not at liberty to disclose at this time, all tend to connect Zodiac with this crime. So as Morph said, at whatever point, they were super hot on this. And I know, Webster was in contact with Armstrong and Toschi. And there's just a lot of back and forth. They did compare ballistics and stuff. I don't really think that came up with much. So that's kind of seemingly what set off the firestorm there. It seems like, if ALA cooled, maybe that cooled press release statements like this from coming out along with it. And then, real quick, as Morph said, with these kind of local suspects, like I said, George Gill made the shack. If I'm not mistaken, I think they did look at Gill for both Swindles and Gaviota Beach, Morph. And again, he has this inconclusive polygraph. I think I chronicled it in my episode. I think he had an alibi, which I think he was up north in Santa Cruz or wherever. So that didn't pan out. This other kid, Robert Lee Bell, who was a classmate of Domingos's. I personally don't think it was a classmate of theirs, but, and Averett doesn't think that either. But again, like Morph said, anything's possible. But this kid shows up with, scratches on his arms and kind of like looks like he had been in some kind of scuffle. So that would seemingly fit. But he said it was from a puppy, and he had also stolen a .22 revolver and a .22 rifle from a rancher. George Gill also owned a .22 rifle. And then, of course, you have Sandy, who supposedly had one. So, I mean, it's just kind of interesting, right? You have all these local suspects who are kind of in the area. They track most of their movements. They seemingly have the right caliber firearm, but for whatever reason, none of them stick. That, in my opinion, that kind of leads me to the Zodiac, because I don't think Sandy's a very strong suspect. And I know we were talking Davis, but just real quick, Morph, when these Santa Ana detectives interview this Sandy suspect, I would really like to know more about that, like what kind of questions they asked him, because if that was the Sandy that was with Reed and Coleman, I don't think he's going to tell him like, oh yeah, I was with Reed and Coleman doing that crime spree, and yeah, then we went to go rob Vern Smith, and we accidentally, murdered him with a knife, because that's obviously not going to get him off, right? So I'd kind of like to know more about that suspect they questioned, who was in the Orange County juvenile.
Yeah, and that's still the frustrating thing, did they print him when they questioned him? Did they verify his identity? I mean, he could have given any name, and unless he had an ID or something, it's a lot harder back then probably to prove who somebody was versus today. But you're right. There's things that we like to know that we just don't have the answers to. But um, again, these are all fascinating cases, whether they're Zodiac or not. And I want to know one way or the other. If they're not, I still find these cases interesting, and I hope people like you keep digging into some of these cases so we can maybe find out the answers one day, and you can share more with us.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think people want like some link to come back, or law enforcement to announce that it's Zodiac, so I can go tell everybody I was right. I mean, honestly, don't care about that. Like Morph said, if they come up with a local suspect or someone that fits and undeniably prove it with forensics, just to get it knocked off the list. And like Morph said, okay, now we focus on the canonicals. Not a single one of these panned out. Great. I'd be just as happy to knock them off the list and have them, verified and solved. Zodiac or not, that point doesn't really matter to me. I mean, I guess if that was the level we came to, then we'd be down to some sort of detective magazine article scenario, like Morph was saying. Because I guess if it was just like a complete similarity, like a parallel copycat type of thing, I mean, I think that would be, pretty random. But I mean, again, it's the Zodiac. We know he was looking at, films, movies, opera, maybe comic books and all these other types of things. So it's not totally unrealistic that he would have looked at other crimes. Did you ever find anything putting your suspect down in Southern California, Morph?
No, never. Not one inkling of stuff. And again, which for me to be right, none of the stuff could be him. So, but I don't mind that. If I'm wrong, you're digging into this kind of stuff. So one way or another, I know there's people like you that are out here digging into these non-canonical crimes, and I'll stick at looking at my guy and trying to find more about him, knowing that other people are digging into these other crimes. And I think it would be good to, when they know if any of these Southern California crimes, if they could all be solved and we get a name, and all those cases are not connected at all to Zodiac, it just makes this mystery, the Zodiac mystery, easier to solve, because now we're not running around looking for a guy that was down in Southern California on X, Y, and Z dates. Now we just focus on somebody that was where the canonical crimes happen. So for me, if any of those cases or all of them get solved, that would be even better for the Zodiac mystery overall, because we can focus on the known crimes.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more with that. And yeah, it's just interesting. There's seemingly this pattern down there. It seems like with Gil, some of the suspects even cross over, and they tested ballistics with Swindles and Lake Herman Road, and so it's just like every avenue you kind of think are the obvious paths. It's like we're already kind of past them. So at this point now, it's kind of like, all right, we either get announcements for law enforcement that something came up, or we don't. Some stuff is a little bit unrelated, Morph, but some stuff I've been looking into lately are the Zodiac hood inspirations at Lake Berryessa. And I got super stuck on that Ned Kelly crime from 1880. I just don't see Zodiac missing that. A lot of people think there's like the Jack the Ripper parallels. This is in Australia 8 years before Jack the Ripper. He creates this kind of metal armor and suit and gets in this massive shootout with police that are kind of arresting his gang. And then he's ultimately hung by rope with kind of a hood over his head. He also wrote a manifesto that was published in the newspaper, much like the Zodiac letters. So a lot of seemingly parallels with that one too. And I know, people have looked into other crimes, but that's one I kind of been stuck on lately. And then the other one is the Marvel character, the Hate Monger, which there's some images from 1963 where he seemingly has, a dark colored hood, H logo on his chest, military style boots, as well as the movie Shock Corridor that also came out in 63, where the guy puts the hood over his head, but has the cross logo on the hood. So again, are any of these things it? There's no way to know, but it's just like if there's that many kind of random parallels with the kind of synchronicity there. Yeah, it's like we none of us know, right? So
it's worth exploring, and if the case is ever solved and we get a definitive name of who Zodiac was, then we can sort of reverse engineer it and go back and say, well, here's why he chose that hood, and he really was inspired by this movie or this book or whatever. Then we can sort of fill in the blanks if we ever get a confirmed name, and I'm waiting for that day to come, and hopefully we see it in our lifetime.
absolutely. The other one I found randomly is the Daredevils of the Red Circle. There's this one image of like a hooded character holding like what looks to be like a Luger 9mm style pistol. Obviously, Zodiac referenced that in his Blue Rock Springs phone call. And the character, I guess like a TV movie or series or whatever. The characters get these letters of hints that are signed with a circle. It seems very Zodiac-esque. I actually found that because I was looking for a film called The Red Circle, which is a French film. I found this on Spotify. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, Morph. It was like Zodiac trivia. And they were saying that law enforcement actually investigated, like, I guess, a movie group or people that bought tickets to this film, The Red Circle, to try to find out if, Zodiac was influenced by this film, or was he one of these people that bought tickets to this film. So I don't know, how accurate that is, because I haven't really vetted it. It's just kind of a random thing off Spotify, but that's what Zodiac Trivia said on there. But yeah, if people want to check out the trailer or whatever, I believe it's on YouTube, The Red Circle, and it's a French film. So that's something I'm going to be following up on.
Well, there's no shortage of rabbit holes certainly to go down to and explore what might have been linked to some of these crimes or to Zodiac's crimes. But I'm glad that you're taking the time to do it and sharing your findings with everybody. So again, thanks for coming on, and love to have you on some other time to talk about some other topic.
Yeah. I'd love to get, try to get something newer. That's why I want to check out the Red Circle stuff. And anyway, Zodiac Speaking, the #1 Zodiac podcast, in my opinion. I always tell people, if you want to learn the way Morph and Rich went through point by point from everything from the canonicals to the letter activity to even, some of that post-canonical stuff, I honestly think that Zodiac Speaking is the best timeline you can find on the case and the crimes. So keep subscribing, keep liking, guys, and, support more stuff.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Zodiac Speaking. Please make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening now, so you don't miss a single episode. New episodes of Zodiac Speaking will air every other Saturday. If you want to follow or interact with us on social media, we'd love to hear from you. You can find Zodiac Speaking on Twitter with the handle @PodcastZodiac, or you can search Facebook for Zodiac Speaking Podcast.
And don't forget, you can get plenty of Zodiac details 24/7 by visiting my site at zodiacciphers.com or by going to Mike's site at zodiackiller.net.
If you'd like to help more people find Zodiac Speaking, please take a moment to rate the show and leave a review of it on your favorite podcast player or app. On behalf of Rich, this is Mike Morford, and I'd like to say thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Zodiac Speaking.